Okay, to continue with our afternoon panel, so we're going to be welcoming Aravind, and I'm going to let Camille, our master student, introduce. Camille, go ahead.
So we have two master students that will interview Aravind Jayan. Thank you. First is Ines Faraoun. She is a master's degree student in English Studies at the Université de Lorraine in Nancy, France. She is currently working on the subject of humor in the post-9/11 American context. Her studies highlight the way Arab and Muslim Americans use comedy as political tool to reappropriate stereotyped representations. In 2024, she was awarded the prestigious Orient Excellency Scholarship and is currently working with the IDEA Research Unit and the Ariel Residency as an intern. Then we have Willis Pinto, who is also a master's degree student in English Studies at the Université de Lorraine, and he is mainly interested in media history. His dissertation focuses on the links between TV news and politics during the Troubles, especially when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister from 1979 to 1990. Alongside his study of British media, his research also revolves around the prehistory of French television from the 19th century to the 1940s. He is a volunteer for the Ariel project to transcribe interviews by this year's author in residence, Puja Changoiwala, and is actively involved with the IDEA research unit. And they will both interview Aravind Jayan, who is a writer from Trivandrum in Kerala. He lives in India and he won the 2017 Toto Award for Fiction and was shortlisted for the Commonwealth Short Story Prize in 2021. His debut novel, Teen Couple Have Fun Outdoors, was published by Serpent's Tail in July 2022 and has since been translated into German, Swedish, and Italian. This novel was shortlisted for the 2023 Bollinger Everyman Woodhouse Prize.
Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
And thank you, Aravind, for allowing us to interview you today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. So, you here?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Our questions were conceived as a way to create a dialogue between you and Puja. So before starting, we wanted to tell Puja that she's free and encouraged to answer as well when the question interests her. This interview will cover a few different topics, from your novel and writing process to questions of translation and publishing. And to not lose too much time, we'll get right into it. So, as was being said in your presentation, Teen Couple Have Fun Outdoor is your first novel. It tells the story of an ordinary middle-class Indian family that is turned upside down when the eldest son, Srinath, finds himself at the center of a sex scandal, having been filmed with his girlfriend, Hanita, having sex outside in a bush. The story is narrated by his younger brother, who tries to be a bridge between Srinath and his parents, not without a certain amount of irony. So our first question is, how did you come up with the plot? Was it inspired by a true story, and did you know when you started writing that it would become your first novel?
Firstly, thank you so much for having me. It's great to see everybody. Thank you so much. It was, I wouldn't say it was inspired by a true story, no. But I mean, partly speaking, when I was in college, and I would go with my then girlfriend to possibly CD hotels because that's the stuff that we could afford, and because the mainstream hotels wouldn't rent to us, they wouldn't give us a room. Mostly, they'd either be really iffy about it or they'd try to scare us away by saying, We could give you a room, but if you want a room, you also have to be prepared to come down and answer questions from the police in case they raid. So we end up going to these seedy hotels outside of town, where our college was. And the first thing we would always do is check the room for cameras. We'd go about and like check every inch to see if there was a hidden camera anyway. So we're sort of like foreplay, checking the room for cameras. And so I think that fear was always there in the back of my mind. This fear that you could be filmed and there could be video. And there were rumors about how people in these very hotels were filmed and then their CDs were sold at the bus stand down the road. So the fear was always there. So I started writing because of that, and then once I started writing is, I think it immediately became boring, the entire story, because I started thinking, is a sex scandal even a big deal in this day and age? Like, does it matter to this particular group of people that I'm talking to? And I got stuck there, and I didn't finish the book for a long time. And I think the only reason I continued writing it was when I realized that this is not a question for me to answer, but rather a question for the characters to find out themselves whether or not it's a big deal. So that's what I realized that's what the novel is going to be about. It's about these people trying to, like in a country where like different parts and different reactions, where it's moving very swiftly, what people think of is something like this. It's about the characters trying to figure out if it's a big deal or not, or trying to gauge what their reaction should be.
Thank you. So, reading your novel in light of Puja Changoiwala's Homebound, I noticed striking similarities in your treatment of the concept of home, as we just discussed, as both an idealized symbol of hope and comfort and an oppressive environment where it seems impossible to be yourself. In both of your novels, this also seems to be a generational gap dividing parents and children. Would you say that this tension between wanting to stay and needing to leave home mirrors the contemporary evolution of Indian society, or has it always been an issue?
To be honest, I find it difficult to make generalizations about it. I mean, one of the reasons I chose close first person was because I was so scared of making any generalizations about the country because they always come off as a little crude or like a little inaccurate. But I would say it's probably a struggle that's always existed. I mean, I don't think it's something that's related to that's specific to India either. I think it's a struggle that happens in families all over. Like you grow up and this is the first fight you have. I think that is the separation from your parents and separation from your home is often the first fight that you have, the first struggle that you face. I think in India, one peculiar thing is that sometimes that struggle doesn't happen. I think that's where it's usually noticeable. Like you don't, there are families where like people grow up and then they don't struggle to redefine the values that they grew up with, or like they don't struggle to separate from their parents, from their household, from whatever values they inherit. I think that is more common in India. I mean, again, I'm generalizing. It's so hard to generalize about a country like this. So I'm take it with a grain of salt. Uh, so I think that is more common, or like around me, that's what I see. Like people who are not so eager to break away, or like who are hesitant, and you end up living the same sort of life your parents lived, and you accept the same sort of values that they give on to you, and you don't question it. So you end up with, yeah, especially I see a lot of men inherit values and they just go by it.
Thank you. Puja, do you have something you wanted to say about that, or?
I've spoken too much today. No, I think the distance is there, and it's not. As Aravind said, it's not particularly Indian. I think it's universal, right? I mean, we especially now when between generations there are so many differences in the way in the external factors, the way we're growing up, and the societies are evolving so quickly. So I think it's pretty universal. Yeah, but it's just that our parents beat us and yours don't.
Well, hi, Aravind. I'd like to ask you some questions now about your writing process. Your writing, just like Puja's, is anchored in the specific context of India, and more specifically for you in Trivandrum and in Mumbai for Homebound. Yet at the same time, your stories are both profoundly universal. So I was wondering, is that a difficult balance to strike when writing? And well, I'm asking questions to you too. Well, yeah.
Yeah, for me it was. I think one of the things I struggled with most while writing the book is balancing what is relatable and honest versus what is stereotypical. To me, I mean, I wanted to be truthful to the sort of people that I grew up around, the sort of parents that I had, the sort of family that I had. But and this is the sort of family system that I have been told is very relatable. That people have written to me saying, "Oh, this sort of thing happens exactly in my family. This is exactly how it would have gone down, and this I recognize the father because it's my father." Things like that. So I'm glad that it was relatable, and I tried to, like, that was in my mind that it should be honest and relatable to everybody. But at the same time, I struggle with it not being stereotypical, like with people saying that, oh, this is a stereotypical mom and dad, this is a stereotypical Indian family. So finding that balance was difficult. I think what helped was trying to be as specific about what I'm writing about, like as specific about the parents, as specific about their quirks, their dislikes, their likes, the specific tones that they use. Because, and I think that's what helped me. I think that's what helped me separate between what's relatable and what's stereotypical, if that makes sense.
Puja? Thank you.
I think if you really set out to make a story universal, you're going to fail because if I'm writing a story based in India, it's never going to be relatable to you. I don't think you can relate to eating cow dung and the kind of disinformation that was going on in Homebound. But I think what makes something universal is emotions, and if you are able to create those and create those well, I think a text becomes relatable, and there's nothing more to it.
Thanks. Also, I was wondering, how would you describe your methods for writing? Is it more of a routine, sorry, that you follow daily, or is it sudden bursts of inspiration? And how do you know when a draft is the last draft, actually?
I think Puja, who's done a lot more books than me, will have like a proper answer for something like the process.
I don't know which draft is the last draft. I never know. I still think Homebound needs to be rewritten. But I really struggle with it. But the thing is that what I do now is I get a publisher fairly early in the publishing process. So I have somebody who tells me to stop working on it. Earlier, it was my father he threatened to delete everything from my computer. So I think you never really know because we try to keep working on it. So having an editor really helps. And what was your other question?
Yeah, you talked about it a bit this morning, but is it more? I mean, your method for writing, is it more a daily routine or more sudden burst of inspiration?
No. I've covered this. I think I do not rely on sudden bursts. They're never coming. So I used to be like that, and I really slacked off. And with Homebound, where I was so conscious because I was writing fiction for the first time, that's when I developed discipline and I developed a process, and that worked for me. And now I pick that over. Because you have these romantic ideas that, oh, you're a writer and you can be in your space. No, just sit down and write. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I agree with Puja on that. I also don't know when the draft is done. I can usually tell when the draft is terrible and not done. That's fairly easy, but I can usually never tell when it's done. I mean, if it were up to me, I'd still be working on this book. So, and yeah, I mean, sudden bursts of inspiration never work. Although sometimes when there are moments of panic when I realize that there's so much to be done and not a lot of time. I think that comes into play sometimes, even if I keep everything else routine. So not inspiration, but sometimes panic, often panic.
Thank you.
So to keep going about writing in general, we wanted to talk about your literary prizes, and specifically, as has been said in your presentation, your work was awarded the Toto Award in 2017. One of the awards given by the Toto Funds the Art Initiative, which I quote, nurtures and encourages young artists in India. Do you think these kinds of opportunities are important for other young people like you? Because one of Srinath's frustration with his parents and with the system in general was that he was forced into becoming an engineer. And is that a reflection of something maybe you lived through? Would you say it's difficult to pursue a creative career in India?
I don't know if it still is, but I mean, it's definitely difficult to pursue a literary career in India simply because it doesn't have that much money. If I didn't sell rights abroad, it would have been difficult to live off the advance, basically. So in that sense, it is very difficult. I don't know if it's still frowned upon to choose engineering or a career other than engineering or medicine. I mean, that's pretty much when I grew up. It used to be a thing in the sense that my parents did try to force me to engineering, and I did about like 6 months of it before I dropped out and switched to humanities. I had to make like a big presentation for them, and I had to lie to them and tell them that I was going to do like chartered accountancy. And I ordered all the books, went to the post office, got the books for chartered accountancy, and then eventually I dropped that to do something else entirely. So I sort of had to like lie to them multiple times to get it. But also, I mean, this is mostly a middle class, upper middle class problem. This engineering medicine thing, because otherwise you just do whatever you need to do to make money. This option of pursuing what you want to pursue is like a privileged thing, obviously. What is the other question? The awards. Yeah, obviously the awards are immensely helpful, at least in the sense of like it keeps you going. It's validation in those early stages, because otherwise you just don't know if you're any good. And awards, and also like literary magazines, like India especially has off late a lot of literary magazines. Most of them are online, but most of my early work I did by submitting to all these online literary magazines, and the editors were usually kind enough to send back the stories with a lot of feedback, and then you become friends with them, you send them your stories. So in that sense, there's a nice ecosystem that's developing now, so it's very helpful.
BSc dropout here. Even I wanted to know, I was on my way to becoming a doctor, and I spoke about this engineering medicine thing in the morning. And I covered prizes as well, right? That it might sound shallow, but it is very necessary, because writing can be hard, journalism can be hard, and anything that gives you the edge to just keep going on, you should go for it. So I really encourage it. It's an ego boost, but it works.
Now I'd like to move on to your the multilingual context of your novel, let's say. So your novel is in English, but your characters evolve in a very multilingual environment that is characteristic of Trivandrum and of India as a whole. But most of the time they are actually speaking Malayan, not English. So do you yourself speak several languages, and do you consider writing your novel in another language than English? And side question, would you say that there's a market for these books in India and internationally?
I speak multiple languages, yeah. I mean, everyone in India does, more or less. So my mother tongue is Malayalam, which is what we speak at home, which is what I grew up speaking to my parents, grandparents, and so on. And then I was sent to a Jesuit school, so their English was compulsory. So we were supposed to only speak in English, otherwise you get punished. So that's quite common, I think, in private schools. So the multilingual bit was there from the very beginning. I did not consider like I can read Malayalam, but I'm not good at writing in Malayalam, simply because it wasn't encouraged much. You were encouraged to be good at English, you weren't encouraged to be good at Malayalam. In fact, most of us dropped Malayalam as like a subject after 10th grade. Okay. So it was never an option to write in Malayalam. It was always going to be English. About writing, I mean, in a lot of cases, inside the book, the characters do speak in Malayalam, especially when my internal process was that whenever the characters are speaking to their parents, they're speaking in Malayalam, and is written in translation. Whenever there's often when they're speaking to their friends, it's in English or like a mix of English and Malayalam. So, for instance, I really mention which language they're speaking to. For example, if they're speaking to a parent who they otherwise speak to in Malayalam in English. So if there is a change from the norm, I mention it. Otherwise, I just let it be and I don't fuss over it all that much. I think it's just something you have to live with.
Thank you.
So to follow up on this multilinguality of India, we wanted to talk about translation specifically, since at the beginning that was what this interview was supposed to be. So one of the Ariel residency's main goal is to translate the author's work to French during their residency. This year, volunteers are already working on the translation of Homebound with the help of professors, and we hope that we could shed light on the relationship between translator and writer by talking to you. How did your novel come to be translated in German, Swedish, Italian, and no French? Was it something that you actively sought, or were you the one being contacted by publisher?
No, I didn't. I had no idea it was going to be translated. I was very surprised, and it was not something we actively sought. I mean, that's not true. When we started submitting the novel in England, my agent also had a foreign rights agent. I didn't know about this back then, but the foreign rights agent did start submitting manuscripts to people. And France was my French publisher was the first one to pick it up. And then there was Sweden and Germany and Italian. I don't know why it was picked up, and to be honest, I was quite skeptical in the beginning because I think a long while ago, a foreign rights agent had mentioned to me that when publishers look to purchase books from like India or Pakistan or Bangladesh, they often look for like one state of the nation novel, a novel that describes the state of the nation, one that summarizes it, and then they just go for that. So when my agent first told me that people were interested in buying the book and translating it, I was quite skeptical because I was worried that people would see it as like a state of the nation novel, which is not something I want to be, or like, and often the books that are picked to be state of the nation novels or like novels that are reports on a particular nation for that particular year are not novels that are actually indicative of or do a good job of representing the country. They're mostly generalizations or like inaccurate or like easy portrayals of the country that are, or like which reinforce things that other people think about the country. So I was a bit skeptical, but I think over the translation process and over the publication process, I've also seen that, especially after the kind of response it's gotten, I've seen that people actually look to the story as opposed to like sifting the book for details about the country or like for representations of the country. So I was pleased in the end, and very grateful, obviously. And I think the translators have done like an immense job, immensely tremendous job conveying a lot of nuances. Obviously, I cannot read the book. I can really like gauge it based on reviews and so on. But yeah, I'm very grateful.
So you talked a little about it already, but since the French translation Jeune couple s'éclate en plein air was published earlier this year, we wanted to know what was your role in this work. Did you oversee these translations, or do you trust translators to do good work? And did you have a different relationship with the different translators you worked with?
No. I don't speak any of the languages that the book was translated into. So I pretty much had to trust the translator and hope that they're accurately translating the book. I did not speak much to any of my translators, not to Benoit either. She messaged me like here and there to ask for like clarifications about certain passages, certain phrases, things like that. So then we would talk. But aside from that, No, I have no real working relationship with any other translators.
Okay, thank you. And as sort of to close this subject of translation, so you talked about being worried that people will get the wrong impression about India by reading your book. But since a translation is never a perfect reflection of a work, have you ever worried about the elements lost in translation, from the Indianness, so to speak, of your novel to the very particular humor of your narrator? Do you think there's an element of untranslatable to every story? Of course, Puja, you could.
I honestly don't know that. If there is something untranslatable, I'm not sure. I'm sure there must be. I mean, I'm sure a large portion of what I want to talk about is firstly lost when I translate from Malayalam to English. And then again, I'm sure a certain percentage of it is lost from when it's translated each time from like English to another language. But I think that's normal. I think translation is often like a work of its own. And that's perfectly fine. You just have to accept the fact that there's nothing you can do about it unless you also happen to speak the language and you do the translation yourself, which is, I don't know if that's a good idea anyway. And it wasn't that I was worried that people would get a wrong impression about the country from reading the book. I was just worried that no single novel can be like a state of the nation novel. Or a good state of the nation novel. And I'm always a little skeptical of people who take a single book and say, "Oh, this is India," and usually it's the wrong book. They say this is India. I was just worried in that sense.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And Puja, is it something that?
No, I mean, I'm not really concerned about it because I think it is a phenomenally difficult job, translating translating from one language to another. I mean, because things that are intended, even in home bandra, certain phrases in Hindi, and the way they are intended in Hindi, I'm not able to convey them in English. So imagine somebody trying to capture those in French. So, but I think people who do it, like Barbara, for instance, is extremely skilled and professional at doing it. So I'm sure she's going to do it. All of you are going to do it to the best of your ability. And I'm no one to judge, because if I were asked to do it, I couldn't do it. So, yeah. I had to do an interview in Hindi and I couldn't do it. I couldn't translate in my head from English to Hindi. So I'm sure it's very hard. Yeah.
The last subject that interested us was publishing. So your novel was first published by Serpent's Tail, whose mission is, I quote, to introduce British readers to risk-taking, world literature. No one else in the UK was publishing. So how did you find this publishing house? And do you feel like your novel fits this description?
Do I think my novel is a risk-taking? No. But how did I find the publisher? I didn't do anything. I submitted it to my agent. My agent sent it out, as is the routine process, to a bunch of publishers. Serpent's Tail came in, and I liked them before because I had read a bunch of books that had been published by Serpent's Tail. And the editor I spoke to there, whose name is Luke, Luke had great ideas about the book, and he was very receptive to what I wanted to do with the book. And he also didn't want to like change it to make it easier for any particular audience or anything of that sort. So, and he was very open about that from the very beginning. So I was very glad to go with Serpent's Tail. And to be honest, no one else offered. So, so we just went with the one publishing house that offered, to be honest. And I'm glad it was Serpent's Tail, to be honest, and I'm glad that Luke got the book.
Okay. I was wondering if you had a say in some aspects of the publication, because, for example, we saw that there were different covers for your novel. So I was wondering if you were involved in the choice of them, or either for the original publication or even the different translation that followed? And yeah.
For the original publication, certainly. Like when Serpent's Tail published it, and they consulted with me and they talked about what options I liked and what I wanted to show on the cover. And with the translations, less so. Most often, I usually saw the cover once it was done. So I didn't have much say in that. I think once the German cover came out, I think most of the time it was too late to make any changes anyway. So I just went along with it. For the English cover, the Serpent's Tail cover, we worked with like a few ground rules of like what not to show, which is like certain stereotypical Indian images of like, you know, a sad woman by the window in a sari, that sort of thing. So we talked about like things we don't want to show on the cover, things that don't represent the voice of the book, things that are too stereotypical, too boring. So we had that conversation. Still, we ended up with a coconut tree on the cover. But still, I'm very pleased with the cover. I quite like it.
Thanks. Puja, I don't know if you want to react.
So obviously the publisher always shows you the cover, and with my first book, I really liked it, but my second book was my first book with Harper, and I hated that cover. It's a horrible, horrible cover. I mean, even if I'm talking somewhere with the book with me, I make sure I keep it, you know. Yeah. But because it was my first book for Harper, I did not want to complain. And I really advise against that, because you'll be stuck with a bad cover for the rest of your life. And that's what I'm going through. But yes, you do have a choice, and you should be able to say that, no, this sucks, please change it. Yeah.
Thanks. And well, this is my last question. Your novel discusses at length the internet and social media's abilities of quickly spreading videos, rumors, or misinformation. So I was wondering, do you think the internet is also transforming the publishing industry and the way people access and read books? I mean, it's quite general, but
I don't have a good answer to that, to be honest. But I'll say I think the internet has definitely messed with our attention spans. It's also made, I mean, there's no, like, I feel like these days when I start writing something, I sometimes think, but this is not, like, it's brought to my attention the idea of freshness a little more. Like certain things are so ubiquitous on the internet that I do not feel like this is something I need to add to, or like I don't feel compelled enough to write it more. Like, so I don't. So in that sense, a little bit, and obviously, as I said, the attention span. I'm sure it's messing with all our attention spans and our abilities to read the novel. Uh, Maybe it's also probably made publishing a little bit more accessible, just because of, I mean, these days you can just contact agents on the internet. You can just email them. You can send them your manuscript. You know when there's a contest happening. You know when like publishing houses are open to submissions. So in that sense, and I feel like generally speaking, it's become a little bit more transparent. People are honestly speaking about the money they get paid in publishing, the kind of editorial process that they go through. What to avoid, things of that nature. So in that sense, it's also a positive. Yeah, with respect to publishing, I think that's a fairly short answer.
thanks.
So to talk about the impact on publishing, so India is not very big on public libraries, because we have greater concerns. So public libraries are not really a big priority. So you have a lot of online storytelling initiatives, which has brought storytelling to a lot more people, which I really appreciate. Then, you know, you have, as far as publishing is concerned, you have these platforms. There's one called Pratilipi, which whereby, like how on Facebook you can share personal stories, on Pratilipi you can share the stories you've written, short stories, any sort of literary writing. And that Pratilipi has now become a publisher, and it publishes these books. In fact, it took over Westland, which was initially under Amazon, and it's like a huge initiative now. So of course that happened because of the internet, sort of a social media for storytelling. So I think it has transformed publishing in a huge way, and paving way for a lot more readers to become writers.
Thank you. Thank you so much to both of you, Aravind and Puja, for answering our questions. This was very interesting to have your reflections, especially for especially on translation and publishing. So I was now wondering if the audience had any questions. Well, I do have one myself. So it's for Aravind. I was wondering if it was difficult to find a publisher, when your stories mostly about sex. And can you tell us a bit more about the reception, a bit more about the reception of your novel in India and abroad?
Sure. I wish I had a more difficult story about finding a publisher, but really it wasn't. I got lucky. We started submitting it and we got a publisher almost immediately. I mean, the one publisher. Everybody else turned it down, as I said. But so, I mean, in that sense, I was very fortunate. As for the reception, it's been great in India. It's been really nice. I was quite surprised by it because lots of people have picked it up, and I get messages online quite often, or emails quite often, about how people find it very relatable, and how something it's relatable in the sense of, like, if something were to go down, this would be exactly how it would go down in their families. So that's been very heartening to see. I've also gotten messages saying, like, I literally got an email saying, please do not ever name a book like Teen Couple Have Fun Outdoors. It's very embarrassing for me to read on the train. So I've gotten emails like that as well. But it's very sweet of them to write it nonetheless, for someone to have an opinion like that. It's very sweet. As to the reception, but with respect to sex, as to the reception, it's fine. I think initially when I told my family that I was writing a book about this, they were a little bit iffy. But I think over the course of me actually doing the book and struggling with it and so on, they've become so desensitized to the idea of, like, sex and sex scandal. I feel like at this point my sex tape could come out and they'd be like, oh, wow. So I think, yeah, that's otherwise, yeah, it's just the name is a little embarrassing in English. Teen Couple of Fun Outdoors. It's a bit too much to say. Like, whenever people come to me and say, or like whenever I tell them, or somebody says he's written a novel, and the next question is, what's your novel called? And you have to say, Teen Couple of Fun Outdoors. It's really embarrassing. So my advice to anybody is, don't name your book that.
Thank you.
I think we might be due for a break, right? Before we break for coffee, I would like to thank Ines and Willis again for preparing those questions, and just to tell them we really appreciate the work that they put in for this. And also to thank our panelists, Cécile and Natasha, for the very interesting talk. Thank you, Aravind, also for joining us. And thank you, Puja, for also participating in all these wonderful exchanges. So now we will break for a coffee break for about 30 minutes, I would say, and then we'll meet for the round table at around 4:15.
Thank you, Aravind.
Thank you very much. Thank you.